Welcome to the Redcaps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. In today's episode, I am joined by the man who has created possibly the most popular OSR title out right now, Gavin Norman. As you know, no mortal can outrun a Redcap, so I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy. Gavin is the creator of Old School Essentials and Dolmenwood. Through his company, Necrotic Gnome, they have published a ton of different adventures, games, and zines. I am super excited to have him on the podcast, and I hope the chat is as enjoyable to listen to as it was to record. So with that, no further ados, over to the conversation. All right. Hello, folks. I am joined by Gavin Norman from Necrotic Gnome, best known for BX Essentials, OSE, Dolmenwood, a ton of other projects. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, good. Great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. I want to, before we do talk about anything else, just congratulate you on the success of OSE and OSE Advanced. Both have been fantastic and have kind of become almost like a touch point for everything else that's happening in the OSR right now. Like it's anytime anybody talks about OSR, OSE is almost synonymous at this point in time. So congratulations on that.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I didn't when I started the project, I had no idea how successful it was going to become. But yeah, I'm really happy it's that successful. I just wanted to bring like BX gaming back into a kind of fresher form, and so it's super exciting that so many people are into it.
Yeah, it's really cool that's I think for the longest time BX has been kind of the standard around everything that everybody's built. For varying of reasons, I think OD&D and BX both kind of lend themselves in terms of being not too complicated, but having enough game there that everybody can grasp onto.
Yeah,
you going with the way you've done OSE, a lot of folks in kind of I don't want to say second wave, but for that terminology, I guess we'll just say second wave of the OSR. After the first wave of games came out, a lot of people, instead of making pure retro clones, went to making their own like house ruled version of various games. And you kind of bucked that trend a little bit by going back to, with OSE Classic anyhow, being a pure retro clone in that form. Was there a reason that you went that way instead of like injecting your own flavor into it right off the bat, or?
I guess it's just because that was what I was into playing myself. I love BX, and the main thing I noticed that made me want to publish my own game was that the way a lot of older games are presented, I felt I could add something to that. I could enhance the kind of usability as a reference. So that for me was the kind of focus of OSE, the kind of usability side of it, as opposed to wanting to kind of change the actual rules of the game. So I knew I had this game already that I loved the rules of, but I just thought I had something to add in terms of presentation.
Right. Yeah, and presentation is often the thing that gets mentioned. So when I sit down to speak with people about OSR games, there's only a couple of games that I usually recommend people up front. There's Basic Fantasy, there's OSE, there's just, now that you can get it relatively easy from drive-through with BX itself. And I mean, essentially they're all kind of the same game, but I look at it in terms of where you want to come in. And for OSE, it's the nicest thing of being a beautiful book. So if you want something very nice to look at on the shelf, but also from a reference standpoint, it's very easy to get through it and find the rules that you're looking for if you need to reference them, and everything's laid out really nice. There's been a really strong look at presentation over the last while. I'm not sure if it's from creators like yourself who've put out just awesome products, or if it's kind of a combination of things like from Questing Beast highlighting it as he goes through reviews in videos and making that something where people go, oh yeah, that is something I really want. It's
I mean, for me, definitely it was it's something that evolved in my mind, when I first got back into old school gaming. I went back to the old books and to the kind of modern clones, which are mostly written in the same kind of style as the older books. And that was just what I was used to. So that I didn't question that. But then, just gradually, I think in the sort of Google Plus days, there was this conversation started around like layout and usability and like the control panel format, stuff like this. And Ben, Questing Beast, and Bryce Lynch as well, like in terms of adventure design. That's always been his kind of very strong focus. So just kind of hearing discussions around this kind of thing gradually filtered into my mind, and this idea came like, oh yeah, okay, I could make a game focusing on that kind of usability and reference.
So do you have like a background in graphic design or layout or anything like that, or was this something that you just like, this is how I think it should look, and went that route? And
yeah, it's something I just developed over some years. Like I don't have a background in that kind of thing at all. Honestly, I think in some ways it shows. I don't claim to be a graphic designer, for example. Like, I see some other people's stuff, like, I don't know, someone like Luca Rejek, like, who is a proper artist and designer. His stuff just looks amazing, like, just visually. So I kind of feel like my stuff is more like, the focus is on the usability and not necessarily so much the like super fancy visual design kind of thing. So I just kind of learned it over years, like started off doing kind of smaller projects in InDesign and gradually kind of learned the skills through that. It's super fun. I mean, I love doing layout stuff. That's half the fun of it for me now, actually.
Has Necrotic Gnome kind of become your full-time gig now, or is this still
Yeah, since the first Kickstarter of Old School Essentials, that was like, I was previous to that, I was kind of working part-time at my day job, and I just kind of said, like, okay, I'll try doing a Kickstarter and see how it goes, and it went amazingly. And since then, I've been full-time necrotic gnoming.
How did you find the Kickstarter process? Was it fairly seamless for you? Was it something where you're like, I had no idea how complicated and crazy it is, or like, how was that whole? Because I mean, it was a fantastic success when all of them have been so far, actually. But
yeah. I mean, just trying to think back to the first time. Like now, if I think of running a Kickstarter, it's like a lot of work, but I know the kind of the process to go through and the steps and the kind of pitfalls and the stresses and so on. I guess the first time it was a complete unknown. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is fulfillment is obviously a major aspect of running a Kickstarter. You have X hundred or 1,000 people like basically pre-order your product, and then you essentially are promising to send it to them when it's finished. But like how to achieve that part of the equation. I remember like not long before the first OSE Kickstarter, my plan was to have all the books and the box sets shipped to my flat, and then to do the fulfillment myself.
So the numbers there probably didn't work out quite as you had planned.
I'm so glad. Like close to the last minute, my wife was like, really? Are you sure that's a good idea? And then I kind of contacted GamesQuest from there and said, I've got this project. Like, can you guys handle fulfillment? So I'm so glad we did that. I'd probably still be fulfilling it now. It's like, our entire flat would have just been full of these like pallets of boxes and
things. Does it come with any extra pressures now that the product has been so successful and the name is so well known? So like with the current releases and the other stuff you're putting out with Dolmenwood or some of the adventures, is there a feeling of pressure or anything from it just because of how well known it is now, or is it still just really fun and you're just putting out?
I mean, in terms of what I'm doing, writing stuff is super fun. Like every day, I'm like, wow, this is just amazing that I'm sitting here writing this stuff, and this is my hobby and this is my passion, but it's also my job now. It's like really amazing. I think there is a kind of time pressure sometimes with a Kickstarter or I've been doing a Patreon for Dolmenwood the last 2 years. There's always a kind of time pressure to like, okay, I've got to produce X by date Y kind of thing.
Right.
Generally it's a kind of productive pressure, but definitely there's a kind of ongoing feeling of a slight stress from that, so it's just trying to find a way to channel that into kind of excitement to get the thing done rather than like getting buried under the stress of it kind of thing.
Yeah, two of the products that you have on your to come list on the Necrotic Gnome website, being the Dolmenwood product when it comes out, as well as the fungus that came to Blackswell, are two that I'm really looking forward to. Is there any updates on either of those? Like, I know everybody's probably coming and knocking on your door asking that question, but
I mean, the update is the same as what's written on the website. Basically, we're planning the Kickstarter for early next year, which is not that many months away now. Right. And the new adventures will be part of the Kickstarter. So we haven't figured out the exact details yet, but like either as add-ons or part of certain pledge tiers or something like that. So you'll be able to get the fungus that came to Blackswell. There's a new one called Imelda's Song, written by Scott Malthouse, is coming out. And there's a in Wormskin issues 3 and 4, we had an adventure set in the kind of crypts of the ruined abbey, and we're going to do that now as a full kind of standalone adventure module. So there'll be those 3 new adventures will be part of the Kickstarter. Yeah.
For anybody who knows Old School Essentials well, but maybe doesn't know Dolmenwood as well, how would you describe Dolmenwood to folks? Sorry, stumbling.
I'd say it's kind of a setting based on like English folklore, mythology, and I grew up in England, and like just the general just the kind of cultural influences I absorbed growing up. All of this has kind of flowed into Dolmenwood. So there's some kind of modern stuff in there, little jokes about things, and there's a bit of kind of gothic horror, Victorian kind of vibe as well in places. So it's a bit of a mixture of all of those kind of influences. But it's I'd say it's kind of deliberately anti D&D in the sense of like, there's no orcs, you don't have all your standard D&D monsters in there. You don't have all the standard D&D demi-humans in there. So there are elves in the setting, but they're very different. They're a lot more based on like folklore, rather than the kind of, I don't know, what are D&D elves? I guess they're kind of
it's
Elric-ish or something like that. I don't know exactly where they really come from, but
I've been doing a bunch of I've kind of got it in the back of my head as a project I would like to tackle at some point, even though I've one, never been to the country, and 2, don't speak the language, but I'm enthralled with Iceland and their folklore and a lot of stuff like that, and the way they handle elves there is completely different as well. I've always thought that was really interesting. So
kind of the folkloric feeling of elves being this kind of perilous thing from another world, that's a big aspect of Dolmenwood. So it's like a kind of dank, mossy, fungusy forest with loads of standing stones through it and ley lines. And parallel to this, there's this other dimension of fairy, which is where the elves come from. And there's several other playable races that can come from fairy. So that's something I've been working on for like almost 10 years now. Actually, it's crazy. it's finally reaching completion.
So that must have been quite the, like, how do you organize yourself whenever you're dealing with a project that span that length of time? And I'm sure you've got a mixture of notebooks or documents here or there. Like, how does one take what it would be? Because you play in Dolmenwood, right? That's your. So how does one take all of that material and then find a way to concise that down to a source book of some sort?
I think a lot of it is finding the structure. Like, for a long time we were publishing the Wormskin zine, was the first kind of published materials around Dolmenwood. And there was no structure really. It was just like, okay, issue 3. What do we want to write about? Okay, cool, this and that. Which made it kind of, it was super fun to write in that way, just wherever the muse went that month, whatever. But it was completely unstructured. It's not a good way to publish a setting. But I guess then just going back to, deciding to publish it properly as a complete setting in 3 books rather than like a piecemeal selection of X number of zine issues. One of the first things then I was aware of was like, okay, what is actually the structure going to be? Like, okay, there's going to be a player's book, referee's book, and a monster book. But then within those, like, what content do I want? So I've had the kind of overall structure blocked out for a long time, like 2-3 years, I guess. And so it's been a case of, like, then for each section that's planned, like, gathering all the materials from over the years, like, stuff that was published in Wormskin, like older notes, paper stuff. I've got a drawer here. I'm always digging out bits of paper, like, oh yeah, I remember there was this session like years ago where I had the players came here, and where was that note paper I had on that? And then just gathering all those pieces into each section of the book. So I literally, I use Trello a lot to track, like, project management. I literally have a Trello card which is like a checklist of every section in all the books, and, like, ticking them off one by one as I finish that section.
Trello is a great tool for anybody who has a large project. I work in the IT space, so you'll see tons of developers using Trello or other Kanban boards, going through that as really well. So anybody who's got something like that, if you've not ever seen Trello, go take a look at it. It's really nice. You can move cards around and just kind of organize life a little bit.
Just a super simple way to kind of track progress on any kind of tasks or project, isn't it?
Yeah.
My former life was a project manager as well, actually, so that's why I kind of
there you go. So the organizational skills are built in then. You came with them honestly then. One of the you mentioned Dolmenwood coming out in 3 books. One of the both things that was lauded and that sometimes also criticized about OSE is the number of books that it came in, the smaller chunks. I own the 2 tomes, so the players and referees tome and the classic tome from previous to that. I preferred the single book or dual book. Which do you personally prefer, and why do you think that there's differences between those who like one versus the other? Like, what appeals to both sides of that, do you think?
It's it's a really interesting question. I mean, it's something that obviously is pretty unusual in OSE, like that. You can buy the game in these multiple different forms. It has real pros and cons, but I think for me, I kind of really like both formats, and I understand why there are a lot of fans who like either one or the other, and that's why we keep publishing them both, because a lot of people love one format over the other one, and I can kind of see both perspectives. So, but for me, I mean, like, if I'm writing adventure or just need to reference something out of play, the tomes are great. You just grab one book, everything's in there. But for actually playing with a group at the table, the box sets are great, because then you can pass around the different small books to different players, and they can consult little bits and pieces in parallel. The DM keeps the monster book to themselves, obviously, so it's kind of useful in that sense for separating the content. The small books are beautiful as well, just physically. Like, I love that kind of format, like 50, 60 page A5 books. It's like just a really nice physical format. Like,
the A5 format period, even if it's thicker, it's just such a nice format of book compared to, like, I've got on my shelf, I've got all my Roll Cyclopedia or my AD&D books, or even the original BX soft pamphlets, I guess is the best way of describing them, are all in that
magazines.
They're all in that letter size, right? And there's something about the more of a novel size A5 that's just nice to feel in your hand.
I think, again, it has pros and cons. Like, the Dolmenwood books are A4 size, which is closer to the US letter size, like it's a full size book.
And that's
just sorry,
is that because of maps, or
just writing as well? Like, just that there's so much information to fit in there that if we'd done them as A5 books, like half that size, there would have been insane amounts of page count. Like the referee's book at A4 size is over 400 pages. So if it was half size pages, you'd be looking at probably at least 700 to 800 pages for a book, which is just way too much.
I don't think people realize that either, because I've heard people criticize OSE as well, saying, "Hey, if it's just BX, why does it take so many more pages?" And it's like, well, they're smaller.
Yeah, it's smaller. There's a lot more artwork as well. Like, I remember I was looking through at some point. Someone commented somewhere about the comparing the amount of art per monsters to AD&D, where in the monster manual there's pretty much an illustration for every monster almost.
Right.
Which OSE doesn't have. It's not that many. It's like 1 or 2 illustrations per page, which would be per 3 or 4 monsters maybe. But if you look at BX, there's so few. Like, it really surprised me when I went through and actually checked. Like, there's very, very few monster illustrations. So that's another big reason why the page count of OSE is just more. I think the font's slightly bigger as well is another thing.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about my original BX books, and that part of the reason that sometimes I'll recommend people go grab the BX PDFs is the examples of play.
Yes.
Which obviously I think a lot of folks that make OSR products do so under the assumption of, hey, I'm probably not the first RPG that you've come across, so I'll skip an example of play because there's an expectation of common knowledge. But as I was going through some stuff this month, a lot of folks were talking, like I mentioned to you before we started recording, that we're doing the OSR October, trying to highlight what we like about the OSR, what's positive of it. And a lot of folks were going back to, hey, let's go look at the Matt Finch's primer, or Questing Beast also has a primer that he put out for old school gaming.
So the Principia.
Yes, exactly. Which I didn't try to pronounce because I would just garble it really badly.
It's got a P and an A in there somewhere. Yeah.
But I was wondering, would there ever be a point in time where you would put out a primer of sorts, where maybe you incorporate examples of play or anything along those lines, for how you see, or maybe even including it with Dolmenwood or something, of how people would play through these settings or this game?
Yeah, it's definitely a topic. I mean, I think obviously the origins of OSE were firmly in this old school scene, where it's like, okay, you don't even really need to have a page describing what polyhedral dice are. Everyone knows, it's not like there is that page in OSE, but like, for the audience it was originally intended for, it wasn't really necessary. And OSE says, if you're new to role-playing games, best way is just to watch a video. You can get so many videos on YouTube nowadays of people playing, so just watch that. But yeah, I definitely would like to produce some kind of possibly even like a starter kit, maybe in the sense of the D&D 5 starter kit, like a kind of real like beginner's intro to the game, plus maybe a kind of starter adventure with pre-gens, this kind of thing. That's something I've kind of got in my mind and I'm thinking about slowly, like how to approach that.
If you go that route, you have to source out, the old school dice and include those in the box as well. Like that.
Right, true, yeah, true. For a starter kit, it has to have dice, doesn't it?
Yeah, you got to have the dice.
The player has dice, yeah. Can't assume they have a crayon either, so got to be included.
Exactly.
even if you have modern dice that are pre-inked, you've got to have a crayon in there.
Got to have the crayon in there.
Mysterious object for new players. Why is there a crayon?
make that a magic item in the box. Whoever holds the crayon.
Yeah.
What the term OSR? As I've known it for a long while, but it's really coming into focus here over the last month, as a lot of us have been talking about it, and as I've been talking with different creators. I could ask 5 people and get 7 different answers on what it means, but what does it mean to you? What is it in your head space when somebody says, I made an OSR game? If you know nothing else about what they've said or what they've ever done, what in your head is an OSR game?
Well, I should preface this with saying that I don't actually use the term OSR myself. I just refer to old school D&D because that's what I'm interested in.
Right.
I feel like when I originally got into the OSR scene, it was 95% was about old school D&D, like 2nd edition and backwards.
Right.
gradually there seemed to be a kind of broadening. Like people would say, well, Traveler's an old school game, RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu. It's like, yeah, okay, they're from that same era, fair enough. Then it kind of expanded further to include a lot of like retro clones, obviously, but then kind of derivative games or games that kind of slightly changed the way things worked. And for me, there just came a point where the term OSR was so nebulous and so kind of actively debated what this actually means that I stopped using it. But yeah, I mean, in my head, if someone says OSR, I think old school D&D compatible. But I accept that a lot of people don't agree with that, so that's why I kind of generally don't use the term.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Another fellow podcaster here lately, as we've gone through the month, and everybody's explored this question, and it's a dead horse that we have beaten past to dust. But
yeah.
He finally went and said, well, are we doing more harm by debating it? Was one of his thoughts. He was like, is making this a debate and making it sound like somebody's trying to define something really hard, is it actually doing more harm than good? And I'm split on that personally, because I look at it not so much about whether somebody identifies as an OSR game or what have you, but more about just being able to product label, which in some ways OSE, seeing the OSE compatible logo on a book tells me what I need to know a little bit about the book from a standpoint of, okay, I'll be able to play this with this. And that's what originally OSR kind of was for me. It was like, oh, if it's an OSR, it's going to be something I can play with those games.
Exactly, yeah, that is cross-compatible, yeah.
And now, like you said, it's become much larger because there's now games that were, you had the games that were inspired by the original games or direct clones of those games. And now we've got games that were inspired by those, and we might be on a third or fourth iteration of that
kind of generations, isn't it? Almost, yeah.
So each one
generation diverges and mutates a bit. So so loses that core compatibility.
Yeah, it's there's still the same. You can draw the thread and the connection through, but if you pick up a product, unless you've spent the time to either look at it yourself or talk to people about it, it's difficult to know whether or not it's actually kind of what you're looking for.
Yeah. I think it depends how deeply into the scene you are as well. Like, people who are following a lot of these new games and are very deeply into a lot of games and old school D&D generally, different editions. I think it's pretty easy to pick up an adventure written for like Knave or Black Hack or something like that and use it with BX or use it with AD&D. But for people who are a bit further outside of this kind of core OSR scene, I don't know if that is obvious. It's probably a barrier, really, which is a shame. I think that kind of original like feeling of like, hey, we're all making stuff that's compatible has been lost a bit in that sense.
Yeah, that's where I think the blank compatible works really well, whether that's OSE compatible. I've seen a lot of publishers that have made basically OSR material, but they've got 5e compatible written on it. But it tells folks, kind of at least at the bare minimum what you can use this with for sure, and then everything else, you'd have to go down that route. But yeah, it's been an interesting conversation with people over the last little while about that, and just kind of seeing how people view it, how they don't, and not so much from a standpoint of like trying to say one thing is or isn't, but just trying to get a common understanding of what everybody's at. So you were mentioning that your entry into the whole scene came during the Google Plus era. Is that whenever you came in, or were you in there like in the forums like Dragon's Foot?
I am on Dragon's Foot and have commented a bit, but it's never been something I've really heavily participated in. I actually read it quite often, but it's not something I've kind of participated in much. But like I started on the kind of blogger era, so I had a blog called The City of Iron, and just kind of got into that scene, Grognardia, stuff like that back then. And then that gradually migrated to G Plus when that came along.
Yeah, it's sad that that's gone away, but it's almost like you can demark phases through the old school Renaissance movement based on where people gathered. So there was a phase where it was all on forums, and there was the blogs and Google Plus, and now it's almost like gathering is happening in either individual Discords or Kickstarters or itch.io, those sorts of places is now where the gathering seems to be happening more so than the others. But
I was talking to someone recently about this actually. He was saying that like if you go back a year or two, the Discord seemed to be this really big thing, like really exploding. But he kind of has, anecdotally said that like the Discord servers he's in now, the traffic is way, way less. So we were kind of saying like, if that's true, where is it going instead? I think Reddit is one place, like it's quite a nice community for the like Reddit OSR group is pretty nice.
Yeah, I stay active in the Reddit OSR quite a bit. There is quite that actually has grown over the last year or two. I've seen more posting in there than before. Yeah. I think people see a dip in Discord simply because everybody has their own Discord. I have my own Discord. I rarely use my own Discord, right? But like I'm more active in other people's than I am in my own by several factors. But I think the fact that there's just so many different Discords and there's no great way of linking your friends from one to another. That maybe it's just a matter that it's been spread so thin that it feels like the traffic's gone down instead of there being like one spot where everybody goes.
Yeah, true. It could be. Yeah. I mean, I must say I'm one of the apparently few people who doesn't miss G+, and like I kind of prefer the environment now. I think because it is a bit more focused, like if you're into OSE, you go to the OSE Facebook group. If you're into Swords and Wizardry, whatever, you go to the Swords and Wizardry group. Like it's quite sort of compartmentalized, but then within those groups, obviously people will cross mention other things.
Right.
So it's not like it's kind of hermetically compartmentalized. But I think for me, I kind of like that environment. I don't know. I like kind of order, I guess. So it's like, okay, if I want to think and discuss about this topic, I go here.
The guy who likes tables and control panel layouts likes order.
Exactly,
gotcha. Yeah. I completely makes sense.
Yeah, you get where I'm coming from.
One of your products that I really, really enjoy is Carcass Crawler.
Right. Cool.
You've done even before this. I've seen other places where you've posted up your own classes and what have you of based on BX. I am enthralled with both your retake on the magic user and your retake on the cleric in Carcass Crawler. Yes, they are fantastic. I think I like the mage better than the magic user. I say that as a GM, not as the magic user player. And maybe magic user players would prefer it, but I really like the idea of the mage, the way it's presented. Is there a class that you haven't put out yet that you're like, I really got to get this out someplace? Like, what makes a good different class than what was in the core books, I guess?
I guess for me, a lot of it is about setting. Like for Dolmenwood, obviously having this kind of strong kind of concept involved in the setting and about how the setting itself diverges from standard D&D. In that, like there's loads of obvious ideas for, this would be a cool class. And it doesn't, those kind of classes don't necessarily have any relation to kind of standard D&D classes. Like for example, there's a Grimalkin class, which is a like cat fairy, which can transform between 3 different forms. So it's a shapeshifter. So it can become like a little humanoid cat, like kind of Puss in Boots style, or it can become a normal like house cat, yowling and chasing mice, or it can become this kind of crazy like invisible electrified fey predator kind of thing. So stuff like that. Mechanically, that doesn't necessarily connect to any of the classic BX or AD&D classes, but it connects to something that comes from the setting. So that for me, I think, is where a lot of the kind of really interesting classes come from. Also, like thinking about things like the mage and the acolyte, just kind of more just like mechanical tweaking, like thinking like, oh, okay, so you have this like thief skills percentile mechanic, and you've got the Vantian spell memorization and casting mechanic. What if you switched one for the other kind of thing? So what if you had a class where instead of memorizing spells, you have these like percentile based magic skills? So that's a class that came more from a kind of sort of game mechanical kind of concept. And then I thought, maybe actually that's how Gandalf works in Lord of the Rings. You know, he doesn't have a limited number of spells he can memorize each day, apparently.
Yeah, he just has
maybe that's
he has abilities that he can and can't call on.
Yeah.
Speaking of classes, the class that has been since the beginning of time, kind of looked at or misunderstood in my brain, is thief.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I was thinking, is it going to be the thief or the cleric? Thief.
It's got to be the thief.
Right.
So I view the thief and its skills as those skills are superpowers.
Yes.
They're not the standard. I can go and listen at a door or hide behind a rock. They're superpowers that are unique to the thief.
Yeah.
Why do you think the thief gets the skills around the thief gets so? Everybody has their own way of handling. There's a house rule for almost every third person that plays old school gaming for the thief. Why is that so constantly tweaked?
I mean, I think it's because in its introduction to the game, it is kind of controversial in a sense that, like, you know, maybe all PCs are thieves in a sense, and like if you look at it on a very kind of simplistic level, anyone should be able to hide. Anyone should be able to move quietly, you know. Anyone should be able to try to pick pockets or locks. So then introducing like this one character, which, you know, as you say, I agree that the best way to view it is that these are superpowers, you know, almost like magic spells. Like,
right,
you know, a magic user can memorize and cast sleep. You know, a fighter could look at a spell book, but they just don't have the skills to, you know, to actually make the magic happen. So that I see thief skills in the same way, but I think if you don't see it like that, then it just opens this can of worms, doesn't it? Like,
why
okay,
can't
suddenly there's this one character that can do this. Why can't everyone else do it suddenly? I think probably it's one of these things. If it had been explained better originally, you know, obviously nothing was explained very well in OD&D, so that's history. If it was explained better originally, though, it might not have become this big controversial thing. But
and you've backported in air quotes different items from AD&D that you found cool or interesting, and you've taken them and reshaped them so that they work with BX with the OSE Advanced. Which I really like. I think that's great. Is there, if you weren't so far down this path and OSE wasn't the massive thing that it is, and you had the ability to try kind of not so much break compatibility, but if you wanted to change something core, is there a house rule or system mechanic from another game that you're like, I would love to be able to plop this into this game, but it would be too. It's a step too far. It's something that you couldn't do without changing fundamentally what it is.
I guess one thing in BX core, which obviously I stick with in OSE, but I don't like at all, is the treasure types. I mean, it's a really cool concept. I really like the idea of the letter codes and the little tables you roll on, but there's just no logic to it. You know, I think no matter how you analyze it, it just doesn't make any sense. It's completely arbitrary. So you know, if that would be high on my list of things to change if I was going to.
Do you have any idea how you would change?
Probably some kind of more like, not necessarily letter codes, but like, you know, you can imagine a monster would have like a few ratings for treasure, like, you know, it could have a rating for like incidental treasure, like sort of remains of victims, and it could have a rating for like collected wealth, and then for like magical wealth, stuff like that, like breaking it down a bit. So then you could come up with these codes that were more like, you know, A4, B2, you know, stuff like this, to classify in a more detailed and like more kind of sensible way.
Yeah, because it would make more sense
that rolling on the different tables thing.
Yeah, because it would make more sense that like a goblin might have, you know, things, whereas a bear might only have occasionally a thing like if it happens to grab it. Stuff, exactly. Yeah.
And I think, you know, that there are treasure types which kind of commonly occur more with like monsters that kill people and the bodies happen to be lying around. But you have to really delve into analysing that to kind of even spot that might be there. So yeah, I think it's a kind of very confusing, like historical kind of system. Well, not confusing. I mean, it's simple enough.
It's relatively straightforward, but it's
why it is how it is, and the meaning behind it is like completely obscured.
Right. Yeah, it's a Garyism, I guess. In terms of how it was set up. So the way I generally, when I come up to the end of a discussion with somebody, or at least when I've finished off my list of questions, I look out and go, I am one of many people that have sit down and spoken to you about these topics. You've been on a bunch of different interviews. You get asked this stuff all the time. What is something that you wish somebody had asked you? What is a question if you're like, why does nobody ever ask me about this? That you've got the answer queued up, but nobody ever asks the question. Like, what is it that you would like to have somebody ask?
That's a great question. I don't know that I do actually have a kind of queued up response for that. Well, I suppose there's other future things I'm working on, which is quite exciting to talk about, which people don't necessarily ask about because they don't know what they are.
Well, then here you go. What are the future items that we don't know about that might be coming down the pipe?
So, I guess aside from Dolmenwood, which is very, very well known and is nearly finished now, you know, I've always got a lot of stuff going on in the background, like from kind of rough ideas, like a few notes on something, to kind of half-written books about things. So I guess one thing I'm really excited about, actually this will be a great thing post when Dolmenwood is finished, that I'll finally have time to work on a lot of these other things. That Dolmenwood has been such a big project that I've had to like really kind of focus myself on this one thing. One thing I'm really excited about, though, is the book of Devils and Demons for OSE, which like it's been mentioned before, but I can say that I'm quite seriously working on it in the background now.
So your own version of deities and demigods, essentially.
Not so much. In a way, it has aspects of that. Like, there's going to be support for, like, you know, okay, so it will describe like Jubilex, Demon Lord, and it will also describe like how you can, you know, what happens if a cleric is a worshipper of Jubilex, you know, some different spells and stuff like that. But that is a really fun project. Like, I guess just because it's so different from Dolmenwood as well, it's like very exciting and refreshing for me working on that. So I think there's a list of like 50 or 60 types of fiends in the book, like in terms of monster listings. So some of the kind of demon lords, like archdevil kind of levels, and then the kind of minions of them. I'm trying to organize things a bit more as well, in the sense that like each of the kind of lord or deity level things will have certain minions that are tied into its kind of theme. So I think that's one thing I don't like so much about the devils and demons in AD&D, that they're kind of like, okay, here's Jubilex with this really specific, like, you know, he's all about slimes and oozes, and then none of the lesser demons are in any way related to his theme. So it's like, oh, poor guy. Does he not have any servitors, or are they like all these weird mismatches that don't kind of tie in with his thing at all? And he's just wishing he had some slimy demons around him. So that's pity for Jubilex. So that's something I'm kind of looking at in that book as well. There's more to it that I will announce in time, but that's something I'm working on that I'm very excited about. That's
very cool. Has there been have you guys put any thought into like a larger monster manual at all? I'm a person who is a sucker for a monster book. I will buy pretty much any monster book that comes out. Has there been like a larger discussion around an extended monster manual ish?
I guess I would see it probably in terms of themes. So like, you know, the Dolmenwood monster book has 65 monsters that are kind of themed around like fairy tale, swampy, spooky forest kind of things. So this Devils and Demons book obviously will have a lot of monsters around that kind of theme. So I think in a way that's how I would kind of see things going, like making books which are like, you know, if you want to expand your campaign into this sort of genre or direction, here's a book with a chunk of like monsters, some magic items, you know, maybe new classes, this kind of thing.
You mentioned genre, which is something at the beginning of OSE or in BX, I heard you talk many times about wanting to do other genres other than fantasy, wanting to do whether it be sci-fi or post-apocalyptic or what have you. Is that still in the works, or is that something that's kind of been set aside for now with other projects happening? Or
it's kind of a mix. I mean, I'd say, you know, honestly, that was like a really cool idea in the beginning when OSE was a much smaller product and much more like hobby kind of thing for me. I think since the fantasy OSE has become so popular, there's, you know, the kind of impetus is more to continue supporting that, you know, developing more stuff that can, you know, continue the fantasy kind of vein of things. I definitely do have that still in mind. So another one of the projects I have kind of partly written is a post-apocalyptic extension. So, you know, again, it would add like a lot of new monsters, no magic items, but in terms of like, you know,
equipment
analog would be kind of you know, tech relics kind of thing, new classes, this kind of thing. So I think that could fit in terms of like being able to buy a book and then either use it to run a purely post-apocalyptic campaign or just to add stuff into your standard fantasy campaign, you know, like kind of taking the Barrier Peaks kind of vibe and
you
like,
find something at the top of the mountain,
dialing it up to 11 kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of potential there. So we'll see. I mean, it's like with OSE at the scale it is now, everything takes longer, basically. So
right. I asked Matt Finch this, and I wanted to ask you as well. Why do you think it is that fantasy has become almost the default for RPGs? There are obviously sci-fi and other genres, but by far and large, fantasy takes the you know, the market share there. Is there something in the way that people can visualize things, or what is it that draws people to that versus the other genres?
I think I guess there's a few aspects I can kind of think of that are possible causes of that. I mean, one is mythology, you know, that like everyone still nowadays, you know, we obviously grow up with a huge background of kind of fairy tales and folklore and stuff. But then, you know, as a child, you're absorbing all this stuff, but then as an adult, it's not in your day-to-day life, is it? You know, so I think that's maybe something that inspires people to kind of seek this in media, like, you know, fantasy films or TV series or fantasy gaming or novels. I think that's one thing that, you know, obviously fantasy ties of all the kind of RPG genres we know, fantasy ties most strongly into folklore and mythology. I think another thing is I think if you talk about like genres with more old-fashioned levels of technology, that's easier to manage and it's easier to visualize. I think this is another aspect that, like, if you're running a modern game or a sci-fi game, the scope of things is just so much broader, you know.
Yeah.
Even if you're just talking about technology we have now, any kind of puzzle or something that comes up in the game, I just Google it. Like, it's just another level. It's a different kind of thing you're dealing with. And let alone if you're going into, like, you know, centuries in the future sci-fi with, like, you know, super intelligent AI, like brain interfaces, this kind of stuff. Like, it takes things into a very different kind of level, which is, I guess, I've never been a big sci-fi gamer, but I guess is more difficult to manage and to imagine how that would work and how players would be challenged, I guess, in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I think it could definitely be a more difficult thing to try to run for those reasons. It's kind of like time travel, right? Like, I think everybody's got some view into time travel, but if you don't do it right, it can be very, very difficult to run.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good analogy. That's like cool idea, but actually, how do you really keep that in line as the DM? Like,
yeah, how do you keep that from spinning and just going crazy out of control?
Yeah.
So is there a big secret Gavin Norman game where he's testing out all the stuff that none of us get to see, or do you get to play very often anymore, or is time largely built up into writing and managing the business side of it?
Yeah, I have a weekly game. It doesn't happen every week, but due to scheduling, whatever. But the intention is that it's weekly. But that's just something that I started back up in the last year, because I guess when OSE kicked off, I also had a child at the same time. So like it was just massive like collision of like no more time. But yeah, so it's been really nice to kind of be able to find the time in the routine to kind of get back into playing. I try to just play, not to make my games about play testing XYZ.
Right.
I'll throw out some new classes that people can test, whatever, but just in a kind of lightweight way. It's not like, okay, here's this big new system, we've got to test this whole thing. Like, just keeping things more like fun and relaxed for myself. Do
you play generally online or in person?
Yeah, online. Yeah.
So if you're playing a lot online, are you a huge proponent of VTTs, or do you guys mostly do like almost like what we're doing here with a video chat and play a theater of the mind?
Yeah, we do Owlbear Rodeo is what we use, which is like, for me, it's the kind of most minimal sort of VTT that I found. And then just video over Discord we use. But yeah, I've actually found I really like online gaming. I think because it's easy to kind of set a time limit, like, we're going to play for 2 hours, whatever. And then like if it's online, you just kind of, okay, right, this is the time limit, see you all next week, bye, click off. Whereas, obviously if you've got a load of people at your house, it's like much more difficult to kind of
it's closing time, you don't have to leave.
Yeah, bye.
But
I mean, yeah, for me that kind of suits my kind of life routine anyway, like,
yeah, especially if you've got a young child
yeah, exactly. It's like nice to be able to keep time kind of limited and compartmentalized like that. Yeah.
Right. So where should everybody go to find all of Necrotic Gnome stuff, your stuff? Is anything else that's in the OSE sphere? Where should everybody go to look to find it, all the projects and upcoming stuff?
If you go to the Necrotic Gnome website, necroticgnome.com, there's a newsletter sign up right at the top. And that is a great way to kind of hook into the OSE scene. That like we send the newsletters about maybe about 2 a month, something like that, roughly. We just send them out when there's news enough to share. But that is like, we make sure we try to share all of the new like third-party products that are coming out, a lot of Kickstarters. So that's a really good way to kind of hook into everything.
Awesome. And actually, one thing I didn't think to ask, if somebody's looking to create products for OSE, is there a specific process they have to go through for that? Like if I was writing an adventure and I wanted to make it specifically for OSE, is there a process I should follow to go through that?
Yeah, it's very simple. So if you just look up the OSE third-party license, it's on the website, or you can find it on Drive-Thru as well. That just has instructions for like what you need to do. Like it's just simple stuff. You include the logo. You can't copy the kind of visual design of the official OSE books. And when you're done, you send a copy, PDF to Necrotic Gnome. That's kind of the basic gist of it. But there's not a kind of, we don't have any kind of approval process or anything like that. It was something I did consider to kind of, to help guide people or give kind of, insight into stuff, but there's just not the time and resources for that currently. Like,
yeah, you can't put yourself out as a project manager for other people's projects. You're still doing your own. Exactly.
Yeah. But I think, if people want to create stuff, there's a lot of good discussion goes on Discord and the Facebook groups about this kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of guidance you can get from the community about how to design stuff for OSE.
Well, awesome. Well, I want to thank you for coming onto the show and chatting with me. It's fantastic. I'm a huge fan of your products. I think it's great the fact that you had such a love for BX and was able to kind of revitalize it a little bit. It was the excitement around BX was there, but once OSE hit and the success around it, it seems like it brought in a whole new wave of people going, oh, what's everybody so excited about? And just it's improved the community all the way around. Just the amount of people that come in, and I'm so happy for the success that you've had with it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I can't wait to see what comes with Dolmenwood. I think that'll be
really
amazing as well.
To have revitalized BX in my small way.
So, everybody should go and check out Necrotic Gnome's website, go to their Discord, keep an eye out for the Kickstarter early next year. And thank you again so much for coming onto the show. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Gavin, thank you so very much for coming on the show. It was really, really awesome to speak with you. And I'm super excited to see the Dolmenwood Kickstarter launch. If you'd like to get a taste of Dolmenwood, you can go and check out some of the really great adventures that Necrotic Gnome has put out. A lot of them are set in Dolmenwood. As well, they have a product called Welcome to Dolmenwood, which is meant to act as an introduction to the setting and kind of replaces the zines that were there previously, the Wormskin zines. They went out of print this past summer. Or go and check out the Patreon as well for Necrotic Gnome, and you can get a whole really good preview of what Dolmenwood's going to be all about from there. I'm looking forward to, besides Dolmenwood itself, the fungus that came for Blackswell. It's a really cool adventure. I saw a older version of it, or the original version of this, and I'm really interested to see how it's going to be reformatted or rewritten, or what changes will come to it for the OSE release of it. So what should you expect for this podcast over the next little while? Well, I'm hoping next week to sit down with Dan Proctor, Runehammer, and Andrew Kolb to have some more conversations. I'm hoping to sit down with my guest host here in the very near future and record the results show for the Child Hero Contest. Thank you to everybody who got involved with that. If everything goes according to plan and schedule, I should be appearing on the Roleplay Rescue podcast in the very near future to have a conversation with Shay about worlds and settings. And in between all that, I'm going to be trying to find some time to finish off the accessory series reviews that we've been doing and plan out what we're going to do in November. I've got some neat ideas that could be cool, so stay tuned for all that. All right, folks, that wraps up this episode of the Redcaps Podcast. I hope you enjoyed, you learned something, and that you are eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links to the ways to contact me, and I would love to hear from you. Please do get in touch. Thank you very so much for listening, and remember, never let your cap dry out. Stay safe, have fun. We'll talk again soon.